Hello and welcome to this edition of Phi TV. I'm your host, Brad Swanson. We are coming to you just a few blocks from Florida's capital during the 2022 Florida legislative session. Today, we're joined by a good friend, Lieutenant Governor Jeanette Nuñez. Welcome back to the program.
Always great to be back, Brad. Thank you.
Well, your plate is always full, but for those viewers that don't know a lot about the office, tell us a little bit about what you do as Lieutenant Governor and what your duties are.
Sure. Well, as Lieutenant Governor, obviously I serve alongside Governor DeSantis, leading the state on any number of issues. In particular, I serve as the key point person for the administration on Department of Health issues, cyber, space, issues related to combating human trafficking, and then a little bit of everything else that gets thrown at me. But it's a great job. It's a dynamic job. I get to work alongside a great governor and work with a team of professionals that are really moving the agenda for Florida, for Floridians, really, and that's what we've been focused on.
It's exciting to see you in this role because we saw you in the House. You were an amazing and thoughtful leader, and it's fun to see you getting to work with the governor and adding your oomph, if you will, to all the efforts that the great governor is doing. Let's talk about the governor. What's it like to work with Governor DeSantis?
Sure. Well, I think everyone has seen throughout the past 3.5 years that this governor, he leads decisively, and I think it's really exciting to see someone that is not afraid to make difficult decisions, and that's been something that I think most Floridians appreciate. He doesn't flail in the wind. He doesn't look at polls. He doesn't look at what's popular or politically feasible. He is constantly making decisions that are in the best interest of Floridians, and I think he does that from a place of principles and convictions, and it really is refreshing. So I thoroughly enjoy serving alongside him and appreciate his leadership.
Well, those that knew you before you in your Lieutenant Governor role, I mean, that's a very similar style to how you were a legislator, and so I think it must be fun where you both have your track shoes on and you're running in lockstep.
Indeed, and I think we've been extraordinarily busy. Obviously, the last 3.5 years, we would have been busy regardless, but then clearly a global pandemic came in, and I think that's really shown a light on what true leadership is, and I think ultimately Floridians are really happy they live here in the great Sunshine State.
Well, let's talk about that because, I'd be remiss if I didn't give you the opportunity to kind of talk about how Governor DeSantis in Florida has really led on facts and science through the pandemic versus the political hyperbole that we've seen across the country. What was your take on how Florida kind of led the nation during the pandemic?
I think history will be extraordinarily kind to Governor DeSantis and his decision-making throughout the pandemic. What we've seen every step of the way, early on in the pandemic, whether it was testing or whether it was making sure that businesses could remain open, getting kids back to school. As a mom of 3, I could tell you that was extraordinarily important for us to make sure kids could have access to classroom education, which is the best place for them to be. And then obviously with vaccines and all of the media hysteria that has come. We have fought headlines, we have fought pundits, we have fought folks that are clearly in it for political gain. And so I think what we've seen as a governor that focuses on the science, that has led, and even so much so that the CDC has often changed their guidance after the fact because Governor DeSantis made a decision. And I'll give you a perfect example. When the vaccines were rolling out and the CDC came up with the guidance to vaccinate essential employees first, well, we were of the opinion that regardless of what your job is, regardless of your industry, everybody's job is essential. But we also recognize the highest risk was for seniors. And so we decided to buck the CDC guidance then and say, we're going to start with seniors first. That was our rollout. That was our approach. And the CDC followed suit, and so did many other states. And I think if you look at our decision-making processes, you've seen that many states have waited for Florida to lead the way and then have done the exact same thing that we're doing.
Yeah, and you look at the advocates for seniors and you look at the Florida body politic, if you were, that advocate for those seniors. I think that move on the administration's part to look for such a huge portion of Florida's population and the most vulnerable, they've been just nothing but singing your accolades. I know the nursing homes were absolutely over the moon with how the governor handled the treatment of the elderly who were diagnosed with COVID, kept them in the hospitals versus doing what unfortunately. Some other states did, that caused mass fatalities in some senior nursing homes in other states.
Yeah, and what I'll say is I think one of the areas of COVID decision making that has not really been discussed through the media is the issue of people's liberties and freedoms. And so governments all across the country were very willing to clamp down on people's liberties, to clamp down on their freedoms, and that's something that this governor and our administration was unwilling to do. We recognize that there is personal decision making. There are people that wanted to do certain things throughout COVID. They wanted to get vaccines or not get vaccines. And we stood with them every step of the way because we understand how precious liberty is and how quickly it can be eroded. And so that is something I think the governor, just from a philosophical standpoint, is really strong on. And I, being the daughter of Cuban immigrants, understand all too well firsthand how those liberties, how your freedoms could be taken away in one fell swoop by government. And so we weren't willing to do that. We protected people's liberties. We protected their freedoms. Everything from something as simple as allowing them to go to church and worship if they so chose.
Yeah, I think the executive order capacity that the governor and your offices looked out for was so unique in Florida. You heard horror stories of businesses literally dying on the vine in other states, yet you saw this administration really move forward with protections for businesses because, first of all, the sharks were circling, right? The trial lawyers, if you will, were like, hey, let's go sue if we can find out somebody caught, COVID at a business or it was alleged, and how do we settle? And this administration moved very quickly to protect the businesses that employ the people that are there looking for their families in this. What was that like to be in that crucible of looking out for, and we'll call it Sarah's Coffee Shop, the smallest of the small business, in the maelstrom of pressures on big business? What was that like?
Yeah, well, I think obviously we recognize that small businesses are the backbone of our economy, right? And so those small mom and pop shops, we wanted to make sure that we protected them and gave them the opportunity to continue employing their employees, to continue providing the services and the products that they so do. And so I think the other thing that we were really mindful of is just the level of hypocrisy throughout, and we've seen it and we've highlighted some of that. Leaders throughout different states and in blue states and in blue cities, they would impose these onerous draconian restrictions on businesses, on individuals, and still some of them have those restrictions in place today, even though they've realized that they have to dial it back for political expediency. But the hypocrisy of these leaders that would say one thing and do another, I think that's really what turned the corner for the average American that's looking at this and saying, I'm having to succumb to these very onerous restrictions, but yet they go about, they do their thing, they party it up in South Beach, and yet here I am having to be a good citizen and do the things they tell me to do. And so that's something I think really important, the hypocrisy and just the willingness of those governors, those mayors to impose these draconian restrictions that they weren't willing to comply with themselves.
Yeah. All right, last one on COVID, and then we're going to move on to some of the really cool duties. But I think parents overall in Florida were elated with how the governor looked at getting kids first back in school. Obviously, they were still masked, and it kind of varied from district to district. But then going without masks and kind of fighting some crazy battles that were, the children are the least affected by COVID, according to the CDC. Their own data was showing it. What was that battle like, just to fight for what looked like common sense to so many parents out there of getting kids back in school?
Well, I think the one thing that we have recognized during COVID is that common sense is not that common. And especially when you're fighting the headwinds of a political agenda that is coming from the top down. And so when we had these decisions, getting kids back into the classroom, they accused the governor of wanting to murder children. It was really, like you said, hyperbole at its best, and it was very politically tainted. So these decisions, making decisions in these environments where people are making all kinds of wild accusations is not for the faint at heart. And so I think when he decided to get kids back in school and we decided to make sure that kids could get quality education, again, always preserving people's liberties and their choices, right? So if you wanted to keep your child home for whatever reason, we have options for you. We have virtual schools and things of that nature. And then when, obviously he battled on the masks, the evidence is clear. Children have very little risk, which is why you've seen some new guidance from our Department of Health. Again, people are clamoring about, but I suspect that in short order, we'll see other states considering and perhaps doing the same thing that Florida is doing. So again, decisions in the context of an unknown, right, like a global pandemic, but now we have the data, now we have the evidence, and so they're only willing to ascertain, and they're only willing to do things that are politically expedient for them, and yet when the data prove otherwise, I think that is something that, again, when you look back, history will be very kind to our decision making.
All right. Well, that could literally, right. We could. That's a documentary. That's a 12-part documentary on Netflix for another day. But all right. So let's talk about one of the coolest departments that you have oversight on, and that's space.
Yes.
So what has been the fun part about being the Lieutenant Governor and overseeing Florida's space program? I know DOT owns all the runways out at the Air Force Base where they launch the rockets. They're heavily, the state is heavily engaged with everybody like Elon Musk and all those. Talk to me about it.
Well, it's been fascinating. It was not an area that I had a lot of expertise in, but I will tell you, I have learned very quickly that space in Florida is something that is absolutely critical as an economic engine, but also from a cultural perspective. We are the launch capital of the world. There is no doubt about that, and we're very proud of that. We have a rich history in space exploration, but what I'll say is overseeing Space Florida, being the chair of the board of directors, we've been able to really expand our portfolio and diversify into more than just launches. We have manufacturing, we have research and development, operational readiness, national security initiatives, and what I've come to understand is that the commercial industry in space has grown so extensively here in Florida. So we have Kennedy Space Center and NASA, but the commercial industry, the Elons of the world, they are really investing heavily in Florida. Florida is uniquely positioned to continue to grow in all facets of the space industry. And from a state perspective, we've invested billions. Just last year, our board oversaw a number of projects that are going to bring more jobs, high quality, high paying jobs to Florida. We have invested over $380 million in working with companies, financing tools that they're able to avail themselves of. And that has been something that has grown tremendously. It was really a bright spot during COVID because the space industry continued to launch. They continued to do all sorts of research. We have small startups. We have large corporations.
It's incredible.
And we even have an art contest that I want to promote for our students in K through 5. We have an art contest going on right now through mid-April. And so have students in the K through 5 grades look up floridaspaceart.com.
All right, we will put that up there. Well, we are coming down to the end. I know you've got several other areas that you oversee. We would love to have you back to talk about the very real importance of combating human trafficking. I know we serve on your committee, and we also serve on the Attorney General's committee, and our industry is a proud partner, and thanks for including us in that, and we're happy to do our part. But in the final minute that we have here, it's the one we break when Lieutenant Governor Jeanette Nuñez is not fighting for the free world and fighting alongside Governor DeSantis for freedom and all the things. What do you watch? What do you stream? What do you watch to take your mind off it? What are you watching these days?
So these days, I would say Yellowstone, Money Heist, and The Gilded Age. We just started watching.
All right, those are 3 solid ones, and I'm watching them all, so we can compare notes later. Governor, thank you for coming on. We really appreciate the time that you share with us and our industry. We appreciate your advocacy for the great things in Florida, and we're grateful to have you at the governor's side. Thank you.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Appreciate it. That's all the time we have for this episode of Phi TV. For more great interviews like this one, make sure you hit us up on our social media feeds. And for now, thanks for tuning in.